My friends, look at the level of collapse that has just been outlined behind the scenes and that the legacy media are trying to hide from you at all costs. The gap between the reality of the Brazilian worker and the palaces where the top of power operates in Brasilia has reached the point of definitive rupture. The verdict of the latest survey by the Atlas Intel Institute put a brutal fact on the table that works like a punch in the stomach of the regime. The national population overwhelmingly supports the immediate financial suffocation of criminal factions. The people want the help and weight of the United States to freeze the accounts and paralyze the assets of the cartels. The average citizen wants the involvement of American intelligence to suffocate the gangs. But while the streets demand order, the Central Committee of the government panicked and ran in the opposite direction. The federal government's plan to go to Beijing to issue public debt bonds in Wuhan, the so-called panda bonds, is not a masterstroke of the economy, as the badge-wearing commentators try to portray on television. It's a desperate move by a regime that finds itself completely surrounded by Donald Trump's ring of fire against the Latin American left. Because the party machinery lost support in Argentina with Javier Milei, lost the first round in Colombia, and is facing a paralyzing electoral mess in Peru. Meanwhile, reports in Washington are already pointing to Cuba as the next dictatorship to collapse. And with Trump's diplomatic and tariff cannons aimed at Brazil, because of Alexandre de Moraes' censorship and the persecution of American companies, safe money and serious Western investors have already packed their bags and fled the country. Brasilia lost its traditional Western partners and to survive the isolation decided to enter a sham marriage with China. But first, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like on the video because it takes a lot of work to make it, my friends. Now stop and think, if Brazil's economic situation were really that good and the environment inspired confidence, would the government need to cross the planet to seek credit in a currency that's restricted and controlled by a communist dictatorship? The logic behind this sham marriage with Beijing is the same as that of a bankrupt spouse who spent everything they had, maxed out all their credit cards, and after being rejected by traditional banks, turns to the local loan shark to cover the month's shortfall. The Brazilian government has reached an alarming level of debt that exceeds 80% of the gross domestic product, GDP. Since no one in the West wants to finance a state that spends more than it collects and undermines the legal security of contracts, Brasilia started knocking on doors that the big global investment funds avoid at all costs. Going to China to issue bonds in yuan is like signing a promissory note with the one who controls the board, knowing that the final price will be charged in physical assets. In practice, what happens is a dangerous dependency. The yuan, the Chinese currency, is not a freely floating currency in the global market. Its value is dictated by political decisions from Beijing's one-party regime, the Chinese Communist Party. By tying Brazil's debt securities to this currency, the Ministry of Finance put the country's neck on the Chinese exchange rate guillotine. In other words, the Chinese directly determine how much our money is worth. If Beijing decides to devalue the yuan to protect its own industry, the cost of carrying Brazil's debt is automatically adjusted at the taxpayer's expense. Serious international investors recognized the trap and began a silent exodus from the São Paulo Stock Exchange. Safe money left because it understood that the Brazilian government is not looking for a business partner, but rather an authoritarian guarantor who will demand the house keys as real collateral for payment. But here's the thing, it's not Lula's house, nor Josely Batista's house. It's your house, it's mine, it's our house. So I ask you, since when did handing over Brazil's raw underground resources and hollowing out our national industry to support the growth of an Asian rival become a strategy for economic sovereignty? Sovereignty, they shout from all sides. The big bluff that the propagandists try to sell is that the Chinese market can replace our trade relationship with the United States and shield us from American tariffs. This mentality ignores a basic rule of survival. The export of basic low value-added products will never sustain a complex economy. At the very moment when Washington triggers the customs rules of sections 301 and 307, applying a 37.5% tariff barrier against domestic products. Because of the complicity with market abuses, Brazil's industrial GDP suffers a terminal blow. China doesn't want to buy our high-tech manufactured products. It only wants to extract raw fuel for its own military and economic machine. China has set the goal of becoming the world's largest economic and military power by the year 2050. But the planners in Beijing face an internal nightmare. Their country is a power that is not self-sufficient in anything essential to win this race. China doesn't have enough land to feed its population, and it doesn't have enough technological mastery to sustain its technological transition. Look at the brutal paradox that's taking shape. For China to guarantee its own internal security, it needs to drain Brazil and whoever else lies ahead. It needs to swallow our soybeans, our meat, our iron ore, and our strategic uranium reserves. And the current government, blinded by short-term fiscal and ideological desperation, accepted the role of being Beijing's backyard supplier, handing over our wealth for next to nothing in exchange for temporary relief in the treasury. Now stop and think with me. If this sham marriage with China were an alliance between equals, why do Beijing's financing contracts always include clauses that give them priority rights over our railways and ports in case of default? In this sham marriage, Brazil thinks it walked down the aisle as a partner, but the truth is it entered the relationship as the employee who's going to clean the backyard. The brain inside the Chinese Communist Party that controls everything in China doesn't operate in the capital market to do philanthropy or save friendly governments from bankruptcy. They operate to seize strategic assets that have been devalued by the crisis. So understand once and for all, for the Chinese, the worse things are here in Brazil, the better it is for them in Beijing. The worse things are in Africa, the better it is for the Chinese Communist Party. The worse things are anywhere in the world, in Iran, in Russia, wherever it may be, the better it is for the dictators who rule that great country. And when the big Western funds withdraw liquidity from Brazil due to fear of judicial authoritarianism and lack of legal security, the breaking of the fiscal framework, the Chinese state banks step in to fill the gap. They don't want payment in cash. They want the collateral clauses that give them physical control over our outflow infrastructure. And that's why giants that abuse the market and face international accusations of extreme exploitation and slave-like conditions like JBS and the Chinese vehicle manufacturer BED gain so much ground and regulatory advantages under the current government. And there's something happening with the Brazilian automotive industry. I saw some people celebrating that manufacturers are lowering the price of new cars in Brazil. Yes, that's good. Brazilians pay a lot of taxes. Every new car that's sold in Brazil is for the government. In other words, part of that amount is the value of another car that we hand over to Lula so he can splurge with Janja traveling around, taking endless trips around the world. But here's the thing, this lowering of the price of new cars isn't natural. It's not working according to the rules of the free market. It's being pressured by Chinese manufacturers who are flooding Brazil with cheap, ultra-modern electric cars. But there's something nobody tells you. These cheap cars coming from China are subsidized by the Chinese government. While American and European companies and automakers pay the highest taxes to sell cars in Brazil or even to manufacture them, China funds this operation over there. In other words, China's tactic is very simple to understand. They come in with the lowest prices on the market, drive the competing companies out of business, and monopolize car sales in Brazil. In a few years, to buy a car, to manufacture a car, we will have to ask for permission from Beijing. Did you get that? There will be no more competition. In other words, the Chinese will dictate car prices. And all the losses that the Chinese Communist Party is having today by selling these cheap cars, they will recover when there is no more competition here. All of this with the support of the current Brazilian government, and there's more. The Chinese manufacturers, this JBS, act as a commercial arm of this alignment between China and the Brazilian regime. Meanwhile, organized crime, with the factions Comando Vermelho and PCC, now officially classified by Washington as transnational terrorist entities, control a quarter of Brazilian territory. They advance over internal logistical routes, operating in a lenient environment, which perfectly serves the interests of monitoring and territorial control by the Eastern Bloc. Beijing sponsors this scenario because it knows that to win the war of attrition against the United States by 2050, absolute control over the Southern Hemisphere is the mandatory toll. Brazil is changing owners and society is paying the price for its own submission. And the truth has a power that no billion-dollar government advertising budget can contain. And the era of lies bought by decree has reached its physical limit. The advance of the doctrine known as the Shield of the Americas, led by Marco Rubio in the US Congress, and the tightening of Washington's financial intelligence agencies show that the clampdown against Chinese expansion in our hemisphere is a done deal. The sham marriage between Brasilia and the UN will not offer an escape route from economic reality. It will only accelerate the country's isolation from the global free markets. And when the oxygen of the dollar disappears and secondary sanctions from the US Treasury freeze the accounts of companies involved in this pact, the regime's support structure will enter a process of self-destruction. And faced with the technical dismantling of our institutional guarantees, all that's left is an analysis to separate those who understand the real game from those who consume the version sugar-coated by the bought and paid-for press. Do you believe that this move to pledge national assets and issue debt in yuan will turn Brazil into a permanent supply colony for the Chinese dictatorship? Or will all this result in a complete condominium where the Eastern Bloc will manage our borders and our ports because of fiscal default? The diagnosis requires analytical rigor. If you see the country's future as a mineral extraction base subordinate to Beijing, write the word colony in the comments. But if you realize that the system is giving up sovereignty to turn the territory into a shared administration with Asian state-owned companies, comment the word condominium. What would you do with your capital if you saw the country changing owners like this? Record your choice right here below in the comments. I will read each one of them to understand exactly what you are thinking. But the truth is, my friends, you can't rely on traditional platforms that follow the system's playbook and receive $500 million reais in advertising from SECOM to understand the real game of those who pulled the strings of global power. If you want to have access to command-level depth without censorship, without filters, and without that playbook of lies fabricated by regular newsrooms, you need to be part of our intelligence bunker. The QR code is on the screen. Link in the description and in the first pinned comment. There we have already gathered more than 3,000 analysts. Elite analysts who dissect raw information to understand what is really happening and what is going to happen. Don't be caught off guard. Don't be manipulated with your own tax money. So come and join our ever-growing community. And so you don't waste any more time looking for a movie or a decent series to watch with your family without any nonsense or whining, we created a channel with tips on series and movies. Yes, and with fantastic curation so you won't be endlessly scrolling through Netflix or Amazon, wasting hours of your precious time. So that in the end, you don't end up watching that terrible stuff that doesn't bring any entertainment, just a bunch of whining about identity issues getting on your nerves. Check out our channel using the link in the description, the first pinned comment, or the card on your screen. And we just released a podcast about a hardcore series that's finally putting an end to the Kudra work culture on television once and for all. So come check it out. Now we've reached the most important moment of our chat today. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a like on the video, and shield your mind. It takes a lot of work to make this, my friends. I'm Shimon Oliveira. I'll see you next time. Until then.